Did you see what just happened? About 3 weeks ago, Wes Huff and Ruslan got together at an apologetics conference in Canada, and they dropped some hard-hitting facts about The Chosen that I'm sure some people are definitely not gonna like, but it's worth getting into regardless. And that's what we're about to talk about. Before that, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button for more videos like this.
What do we do with media concerning the enactment of Christ like The Chosen, where historical liberties are taken to portray the gospel? Yeah, that's a doozy.
Yeah.
You go first.
Okay. It's interesting. So I am on the side of this conversation where I know people who love The Chosen and people who hate The Chosen. Yes. I think I can appreciate something like The Chosen for what it is, in that there's artistic license. Now, when I had a friend who started watching The Chosen, and the way he described it to me was that when he started reading his Bible, he started picturing, what's the actor's name? Who's in The Chosen?
Jonathan Rumi.
What was it?
Jonathan Rumi.
Jonathan Rumi.
Jonathan Rumi. He started picturing Jonathan Rumi, and that concerned him.
Wes points out two very important things here, and that's the fact that for all the success, there are people who hate The Chosen. Maybe not nearly as much of those who love it, but The Chosen doesn't play things how they happened in the Bible word for word, and I can understand how for some, that's unacceptable. This brings me to the second point. The really more important thing Wes pointed out is the fact that people need to realize that there's artistic license. None of these guys were there when it happened. They can try to go for historical accuracy, but it's still not going to be 100%. And playing things the way they happened in the Bible, word for word, might not really make for good visuals. I mean, we all saw Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, and there were some elements that really didn't track with the Bible. Understanding that they've got to dramatize it to fit the genre is great, but there are some major drawbacks, and Wes wastes no time getting into it.
The way that he described it is, he said that when he watched the Lord of the Rings movies, and then he read the books. And when he started to read the books, these thoughts popped up in his mind where he was like, that didn't happen. That's not how that narrative goes. And he was confusing the source material. And I think that I know people who have really benefited from looking at the artistic license in something like The Chosen. And I know people who they've in their minds, for better or for worse, started confusing the source material. And so I think there's wisdom in pausing and looking at The Chosen, or any of these other artistic depictions, like the David one that you mentioned, Ruslan, for what they are, and not trying to make more of them than they're actually trying to portray.
I'm going to go ahead and say this. Confusing the source material should be only an issue for people who are not familiar with the Bible or Christianity, like at all. I don't think any decent Christian looks at The Chosen and picks its authenticity over the Bible. However, I can see how the way these movies interpret the Bible can scramble things up and leave you trying to fill in gaps, especially since the Bible didn't bother itself with fleshing out the details and creating this sensory novelesque feeling. As much as The Chosen might help a lot of people have a sensory, really immersive feeling of the Bible, Wes's advice to just take a step back and examine the entire thing, that's solid. The truth is, no matter how successful these biblical series or movies get, they can never be a stand-in for the real thing, which of course is the Bible.
But I think there's also an aspect of humanizing. When I was a kid, it was a reenactment of the Gospel of Matthew, where it was a narrator reading the Gospel of Matthew, and the disciples and Jesus and all the rest were just kind of acting out what was being said. And this one scene sticks out in my mind where it says, and they dropped their nets and they followed him, and the actors just kind of go, I mean, like, okay.
That's what they did. That's what they did.
I think that's something where The Chosen can make it more organic and actually contribute to our understanding of Scripture, as long as we're clear on what the source material is and isn't.
Wow, I got a good ache in my ribs for that one, I'll tell you. It's such a funny, yet sincere way of showing why the perspective of people who expect a word-for-word dramatization of biblical events isn't exactly watertight. And like Wes says, it's in the little things like movies like The Chosen can introduce effects that give it a more organic feeling. These events did happen to human beings after all, not robots. However, I think it's very important that we take to heart what Wes says at the end of the clip. These organic effects only matter for as long as they contribute to our understanding of the scripture. If all they do is contradict the Bible, then obviously something else is going on here, and that is not biblical. Ruslan also had some pretty interesting things to add, and I think that too is worth looking at. You know what else is worth looking into? The fact that you're yet to like this video. Here's your chance. You might not get another one.
But this is what I would say. I think we have to let people define what they're creating instead of telling them what they're creating. And we do this all the time. We want to tell people what they're making instead of saying, instead of hearing what they're making. So they're not making a Bible show, they're making fan fiction inspired by the Bible. And they've always been transparent about that. This is how I would define it. Back in the day, I used to have a buddy, he worked at a supplement store, and there was a window of time where he didn't have any money. And so he started living off of protein shakes. And after about a week...
It doesn't work, I've been there.
Yeah, after about... For real.
It's not good for the digestive system.
Not at all. After a week, to Wes's point, he had to go to the hospital and get his stomach pumped.
Right. Right.
Protein shakes are not sustenance.
Yeah.
They're supplements.
Yeah.
Cannot survive off of supplements.
Yeah.
So The Chosen, Christian podcast, whatever you want to talk about, are not sustenance. They're not your bread. They're not what you're supposed to feast on. They're just supplements in your journey.
Yeah.
And I think when we mix up the categories, then we start doing things like reading the Bible and envisioning Jonathan Rumi.
That's crazy.
That was a much more organic representation of what Wes was saying earlier. But, I mean, hey, it worked, right? People, Christians and non-Christians alike, need to start realizing that the Bible is the main dough of Christianity. It's what guides our path, our conduct, and our belief. Every other thing is culled from the Bible. The books, the podcasts, the movies, you name it. And so you cannot expect to treat the supplements as the real meal. Supplements are supplements for a reason. And so if you depend on them primarily, well, you've got to be prepared for what happens next. And it's not going to be good. Some of you can attest to that. Ruslan has tried to clear up the entire debate about whether The Chosen is good or bad in the beginning of the clip when he said that you need to let the people who make the stuff name it rather than naming it for them. And that is true. Talk about waiting to hear it from the horse's mouth. However, this is the Bible we're talking about here. Are fanfics even a thing for a book like the Bible? Also, given that it's a book that instructs, informs, teaches, and guides all of Christianity, is it possible to have a monopoly when it comes to naming stuff from it? I'd love to see all your answers and your opinions down in the comments section. If you found this video interesting, you'd be doing someone a favor by sharing it with them. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.